Hey, good morning, everybody. It is
Good
day
morning.
12, April 6th. Good morning, Penny.
Good morning. I can never keep these days straight. It's day 12, really? We've done 11 of these?
Yep. 11 down and what, 19 to go in
Let me
this
tell you,
round.
it is 60 degrees. It's going to be 70 this week. I've got only a tiny bit of snow left in the backyard, so all is fabulous.
Yeah, gonna be 91 here today. So
Hey,
it
I
feels,
posted an essay for you on the Padlet, the essay Padlet, the argument in the Times this morning that baseball is circling the drain as a sport.
you know what?
Argument for having somebody take it over because the revenues are so bad. The people watching, there's so few people who tune in. They compared it to the number of people who are watching some dubbed rerun of some bad movie is getting the same kind of draw as the World Series for baseball right now. Ooh,
Well,
Kelly's got to come back. Why do we need the American sport? Or I
I'm
do.
going to have to read, we'll do a whole session on that. I'm going to have to read the
Ooh.
essay before I respond. I would just say off the top of my head, the 45,000 people who attended the preseason game alongside me, the Angels and Dodgers the other night would disagree with
Yeah,
that
well, they
editorial.
might disagree, but he would say that's such a tiny percentage of the overall population that it can no longer have any status in our culture of sports. Boom, you are going to have to read that and then we'll have to talk.
Should we start over?
No, why? You don't like this conversation? Oh my God. Actually, I was just using it as a way to say I add stuff to that Padlet all the time that I think is interesting or provocative or and so if people haven't been there, the mentor text Padlet that we put together starting with essays is a great.
No, I'm kidding. I really look forward to reading that and will respond to you either on or off the air. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation with Lucy yesterday. And one of the things that struck me as we were listening to her was that, she's been such an influence in each of our teaching lives.
Mhm.
More directly with you through her connection with the two Dons, but certainly in my teaching career as well. And it got me to thinking about, teachers who have been around a while, like you and me. We have sort of a lineage. We're part of a lineage
Mm.
of why we are who we are as teachers. There's sort of this teacher DNA that makes us up, and it didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of the mentors and the authors in our lives. And it's sort of off the top of my head, so I won't go there too far. But there are certain people like that have deeply influenced us in each of our teaching family trees. And thinking about that and thinking about where we are in our stages of our career, and how Lucy kind of talked about passing that baton a little bit without actually saying those words, and I was wondering, like, we get approached a lot. I'm sure you get approached a lot by younger teachers
Yeah.
who will be the next generation of these people who will be part of the next generation's teaching DNA. And do you, like me, do you get asked a lot, I want to write a book, how do I do it?
Yeah, and I get asked, I want to do what you do. Can you tell me how? And I really think that presenting to teachers is often tied to what you've published, articles, blogs, however you're making your voice heard in the world is definitely tied to whether or not you're going to be invited to speak, because it's not like social media and the quick little things you say on Twitter. It's when people begin to read more deeply your thinking. And, recently I told you I was approached by someone who wants to write a book. And I was so struck by the fact that I really do have some practical advice I would give anyone interested in writing a book about teaching. And I just thought we should kick that around. So I want to tell you one of the things that I said to this person who wants to write is that you need to commit to the project enough that you'll give it 15 minutes a day. My old Don Murray, never a day without a line. I only had 2 of these, Kelly, and I sent one to you. He used to send it with a packet of articles to anyone he considered interested in wanting to publish. And he sent it to me so many years ago. and it's in my office. And the thing it reminds me of is that when you write, it stays in your head the rest of the day. And when I avoid writing, when I avoid a project, then it stalls, and it stalls for days and days. And I think if you're a new person wanting to publish, you've got to make the commitment that I'm going to put whatever's in my head down on the page today, and I'm just going to give it 15 minutes. And I'm going to come back and say more tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should, that this was a Latin phrase that translates into never a day without a line. And when you gave this to me, it sat right up here above my screen. It's
Look at
really,
the
really
backside of it, right? Because the
Yeah.
backside is just solid quotes from writers across the ages.
Right. And I agree. But I would add to that, not only 15 minutes a day, but I think you have to find your time of the day where, it might flow for you. For me, and I think for you, it was pretty early in the morning. And while we were teaching, we wrote all our books while teaching full time.
Right.
And so for me, I had to do that writing very early, because if I waited till after school, I was often way too spent to be creative at all, which is why I always found it was fascinating when Jim Burke one time told me that he does all his writing late at night. I don't have the stamina to do that. So I would do mine very early in the morning. And this idea that it does stay with you. My wife always accused me, you were writing even when you weren't writing.
Oh, yeah.
And then I would say one of the other things is that would help me in that morning of getting started is, I might have heard this from you, I'm not sure, is that before I would go to bed at night, I would go reread what I wrote that morning and just kind of have it there, so that when I woke up that morning, I don't know, there was something that happened when I slept that sort of kind of helped me ease back into that.
Yeah, Murray told me to make a list of where I might go the next day when I wrote, and then leave it, so that you were kind of seeding that into your brain the way you talk about rereading. I think both of those ideas, like when you write and how much, but I think another one that I learned from both Graves and Murray quoted William Stafford, who said, lower your standards until you can write. And the idea was that we come in, especially as English people, into writing with this idea in our head that it's got to be really fabulous, and that fabulous is often the result of lots of revision. And everyone can say, oh, just put your words on the page, but you really have to convince yourself that perfect is the enemy of good, that if you sit there and wait for it to sound perfect, you're not going to get anything written. And likewise, every book I've ever written, I had a much bigger, grander vision than what came out in the end from the printer. And that's because sometimes you're just tired and you can't work on it anymore, and it's due. Murray's famous line to me was, writing's not done, it's due. And as soon as you get into that, you send that article off. What do you think about that?
I was just remembering how done we were at the end of 180 days, just how done we were. Like, we would have said anything to get that to print,
Absolutely. There were stretches, Kelly, during 180 days when I was getting up at 2:30 and writing until 5:30 and then going to teach.
Yeah.
That was grueling.
But it is never finished. It's just due is really an important lesson. And, even today, like, I don't make it a habit of rereading my own books, but sometimes I'll pick up one of my books because I'm looking for something that I said in there. And I find myself reading something and going, oh God, that could have been revised one more time. It is just due. And I think that's why with super reluctant adolescent writers, I think one of the best strategies is just have them record, just tell the story,
right?
Just to get some momentum going, have them record it and then transcribe it.
Well, I remember my student Oscar, where I told him to simply walk around campus, because walking and talking was his drafting, and hit record on your phone and then transcribe that for your draft. And it changed everything for him. Because
I know a lot of times when I got stuck writing, if I would go exercise really hard, it was incredibly helpful.
Well, and so many writers have said, right, go for a walk, right? And I couldn't believe how well it worked for me to walk my dog. There's a 2-mile loop around our neighborhood, and I would come back and go, oh, Now I know how to get back at it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm curious though, for those who are interested in trying to become published, what was your journey to getting published?
Well, so first of all, I wrote with my students to try to figure out how to teach essay writing. That was really the beginning of when I started writing a lot. I had been keeping notebooks since I was a kid, but I started writing because I was trying to show them the process of putting together an essay. And in the midst of that, there was a call for manuscripts from Voices from the Middle, which I read religiously because I was teaching 8th grade. And, you know, Kylene Beers is the editor, totally terrified me, this important person that was editor. And the call had something to do with teaching writing. And I don't know if it said process, but I was in the midst of teaching fiction and my piece had gotten away from me. And I can remember night after night after night sitting on my deck, revising this thing because I knew what I wanted to say to other teachers about how much I didn't know about teaching fiction. And it became Writing Giants, Columbine, and the Queen of Route 16, which was published in 2001. And I have to tell you, when I got the phone call from Kylene's secretary that they were going to publish it, I honestly hooted and hollered and ran through the house. I was so excited. And I didn't ever have any vision of a book. It was just like, I'm going to get published in a journal. Like something I had to say. And I actually got to write an introduction to it. They published it in a 20-year anniversary of NCTE's Voices from the Middle. And it got republished and I got to write the introduction, which was a real thrill. So I would say to teachers to begin, those call for manuscript pieces, they're in all the journals and it's so worth it. Give it a shot.
Yeah, I think one of my first ones was California English.
Yeah.
I think it was called Righting Wrongs. I know you have to think about that, right?
I know, I'm not loving the title, but
the first writing is an R and the second writing is a W.
Right.
Right. So, okay, so you wrote a journal article, but how did that put you on a road to now all of a sudden you're writing a book?
Well, because I felt like not only did the article finally come together, and I really loved it, I still love it, but I felt like, oh my gosh, you have something you could say to teachers. And I was at the time going to like New Hampshire Council of Teachers of English and presenting to rooms of 8 people, you know, about the things I was doing in essay writing. And in the same year that journal came out, I sent a letter to Don Graves' editor, because Don and I were buddies and had been spending a lot of time together. And he gave me her address and said, send her a note. And I sent her one of the essays I'd written about a kid playing in the championship game in baseball. And she was just so wonderful. Lois Bridges, still one of my big mentors. She just encouraged me in every way, said, you might want to think about a book for teachers on what it's like to be a teacher. And that's what I wrote. I can remember distinctly mailing it off to her, the proposal, the draft letter, all that stuff. And Pat and I got on a plane and took a vacation to Europe. We'd been planning for some time, and I tried not to think about it for 10 days. Didn't check email. I had no way to know if she was reading it, what she thought of it, and came back with her saying, we want to publish this, which was such a shock. So
that's so cool.
Yeah, it was pretty exciting. How about you? Reading Reasons, your first book.
Well, I taught 15 years before even the thought of writing a book occurred to me. And like you, it came out of my classroom. I was actually doing some really short 5-minute mini lessons to kids on why they should read. It seemed to me we spent all our time helping them how to read, but if they didn't want to read, or if they didn't have the motivation to read, right? So I started doing these little mini lessons, and some other teachers started to hear about them. And this is how long ago that was. I was actually stapling them in packets and handing them out to teachers. And somebody once said to me offhandedly, you know, you ought to put these in a book. And that was the first moment. And so what I did is I actually knew a couple teachers who had written books. And so I contacted first one of my mentors, Mary Kay Healy, who was in the initial writing project site at Berkeley and was in charge of student teachers at Berkeley. Mary Kay was one of my early mentors. And I just, like Lois did with you, I asked her, really, do you think this is something, or do you think this is nothing? And she was super encouraging. And so I went to NCTE at Baltimore 25 years ago.
What, 97?
Yeah, maybe.
I think
And
so.
I walked
That I
in,
went to.
so I did a little research, and at that time, Heinemann had a whole bunch of stuff because they were, the Babe Ruth of publishing. Stenhouse was a much smaller house at that time, and they didn't have they had a lot of primary, but not a lot of secondary. They had a little bit of Janet Allen and Chris Tavani's groundbreaking book. I read it, but I don't get it. It just come out. And so I walked into the Stenhouse booth and I said to them at the conference, I have an idea for a book, which I've later learned they get a ton of that.
Oh, yeah.
And they said, I think I talked to Tom Seavey, and he said, tell me a little bit about your book idea. And I kicked it around, and he said, well, and this is the advice I would give those listening today, is that all of the publishers, I believe, have online proposals. And so he asked me to go fill out an online proposal. I did. They said they liked it. Then they asked me, can you write a chapter? I did. And then they sent me a contract, and I was on my way. But I want to say again, I never really set out. I mean, it was 15 years, and I don't think I could have written that book if I wasn't in the classroom, or if I didn't have, that background of working with kids, right?
For sure. And it was at least 15 years for me too. I have to go back to this. Was Baltimore your first NCTE?
No, it wasn't my first NCTE, but it was the NCTE in which I walked into the booth and proposed that book. I don't know. It's I want to touch a little bit on what you said as well too. And even today, even all these years later and all these books later, I never sat down to write a book with the mindset, oh, I'm going to teach teachers. I'm going to show them this is how it can be done. It's always been the mindset of this is what I'm doing in my classroom. And there's a couple things here I think that's worth sharing that I think maybe you might want to think about. And I've said this in a previous recording, even you've said to me, what's going on in your classroom? What decisions did you make today? And I think a lot of times in my career, and probably in yours as well, I've been asked, why did I stay at the same high school all these years? I could teach anywhere I want, but that's the place where the books came from. Why didn't you leave the classroom? Why didn't you go do this? It's because that was what generated the ideas for the books.
That's interesting to me. I knew exactly what I wanted to have happen with public teaching. I used to walk around my neighborhood imagining Oprah calling me and saying, I finally get it. I understand what teachers are going through. We need to be better to teachers. I wrote that book entirely not for teachers, for people who have kids in schools. And I wanted them to understand this is what teaching is. This is what we carry away from the classroom. These are the kids we can't let go of. These are the experiences that turned me upside down. And it's interesting to me that anyone thought it was worth really thinking about, because I always say my first two books were memoir. They're all essays, but they're really about what it meant to be a teacher. And I did not intend to be any kind of an influence, I guess, on the profession, but more I wanted to think with other people about just how hard it was to be a teacher. And I have to say, 3 former students died by suicide in the last week of mine.
Oh my gosh.
Just the one I heard about yesterday, I still can't believe. And I've taught for a really long time in a small place. So you're going to hear stuff like that. But I don't think that most people understand the emotional lives of teachers. And they don't understand how much we care and how long we care. You and I have talked about running into kids from the 180 Days Project, right? I ran into the mother of one of the kids in that project at the conference on Saturday, and oh my gosh, how is he? What's he doing? You know, and it's so good when the answer is all, you know, joy and beauty. And, you know, two of my former students, one in 180 days, started a restaurant chain that's doing amazing things. But there are also at least as many that break your heart.
Wow, I'm so sorry to hear. That's the first
Yeah.
I've heard of this, and I'm just, oh, I'm heartbroken to hear that. And
Yeah.
you know, this might be a topic for another day, too, as well. You know, coping. You know,
Yeah.
how do you, you know, not get too. You have to harden yourself in some ways, right, to deal with, you know, some of this. So I don't know.
Yeah, I
I think
don't
it's
know. I think about
compassion fatigue. You know.
yes. And I think about how much my notebook has helped me with that. Because don't you think that a lot of things that we carry, when you spill it in your notebook, you've left it somewhere, right? And it's almost like it then allows you to walk away a little lighter. It's why I always, when someone tells me they're going through something hard, I'll say, I think you should write about it, because, you know, you want to tell your side, you want to tell all the things that you're just not ready to say out loud. And I, it's it's hard to imagine that we don't have a lot of teachers who might be listening who are going through similar, you know, the heavy burden of what it means to teach right now,
Mhm.
and the things that kids are bringing into the classroom and that they themselves have experienced. You know, we can never leave ourselves at the door. So, you know, bringing it back to where we started, another thing that I think is important to think about when you begin, if you want to write, right? And that is that this is what you're really good at, Kelly, and I'm not good at this. Every publisher will ask for a TOC and a chapter, right? Got to have a table of contents, got to have a vision. We're going to start here and end here. And for me, I'm always like, oh, I want to stay in big idea land. I don't know. What are the parts? The parts don't matter. Let me just ruminate on all my grand thinking. And do you remember 180 days? I think we had one conversation and you sent me a table of contents. I mean, that is the way you work. You're like, it's going to be like this, 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 this. And I was like, oh, wow. Imagine working with someone who's got the organization gene that I'm missing. And I think that for teachers, mapping out, like, what am I trying to say? Here's, you know, 5 things about this or 10 things about this. And I think it really helps you to have a little bit of direction, kind of where
Yeah,
you go.
I would say 2 things about that. Number one is I always have an outline. But I hardly, you know, I outlined all of my books, but never completely followed the outline. It's
Sure.
just a launching place. It's a place that you end up, as we've mentioned many times, you end up in a totally unexpected place. But if I may use this as a metaphor, when I go on a journey, I like to have a map. I may be going from city A to city B, and I may decide halfway there that I'm going to detour, but I kind of like to know where I'm going. Whereas you're like wild adventurous. Let's just take off and let's see where it takes us. And
I am. I am. And if we get lost, oh, that's interesting. We'll figure it out.
yeah, if we get lost, it's actually good because it may be an opportunity to think about something we haven't thought about. And I think there's a real value on both sides of that coin.
Yeah. And I was going to share one last little glimpse of this last book that I worked on. And it's been in my head for so many years, I can't even say, but you know how I do everything in a notebook. And in the last minute, leaving Michigan 2 weeks ago, I put my notebook in my carry-on bag and locked my carry-on bag. And then they took it from me, gate checked it, and they broke the lock. TSA has a tool, but they broke it. So when I landed, I couldn't open my suitcase, and my notebook was in there where I had written the ending to the book I was working on. And I was just like crazy that morning. I was like, am I going to have to break my suitcase to get my notebook? And Pat, of course, Mr. Logic, calls a locksmith who's at the bottom of the hill. And that guy got my suitcase open. But the idea that I have over time lost notebooks. I lost one in the midst of this particular project and actually put an SOS out on Instagram because I'd been in Michigan and said, this was years ago. I'm looking for this notebook. Where is it? But I think that for me, I always take a deep breath if I've lost something. It might be a train of thought or a big idea or a chunk of text, or, you forgot the file and you can't find it. And Don Murray told me this many times. You should sit down and rewrite whatever you were working on, but don't look at what you wrote yesterday. Start it again and then close it and start it again. He said, because the important stuff will stay with you and you'll get married to your words. One of the biggest dangers of writers from your first draft. And you'll want to go to that first draft and just make it a little bit better, but maybe your first draft didn't even get there. So just close it, start over. And that's always been a comfort. Like if I'm in trouble and I've lost something, I'll find it again. It's in my head.
We've always talked about how writing is generative. It will take you to unexpected places. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you've just seen an oral version of what it's like to hang out with me and Penny, because we'll start a conversation about getting published and, you know, it will end up in unexpected places. So I have a feeling we've touched on a couple of themes that we may come back and revisit in some of the subsequent episodes. But I just encourage anybody who's in the classroom and thinking about sharing some of their thinking to step out and do it. And neither one of us ever believed it. You know, you said you screamed around the house. I remember when I got my first royalty check, which was almost nothing for reading reasons. And, you know, I don't know if you've ever been in a barber shop where they have the first dollar they ever made up on the wall. Like I wanted to put that on the wall because I could not believe somebody actually shelled out money to hear what I had to say. And so I just want to say we all started where some of you are thinking right now, where some of you are right now and thinking about writing a book. And I just say, let's go, share it.
Write your life, right? Share it. We want to read it.
15 minutes a day is where it starts.
That's right. All right, you guys, we'll see you tomorrow.
Okay. Bye-bye.